The AfD defends Bitcoin and the one-year holding period. They issue an official press release stating that they do not support what is currently being planned by the SPD because this is nothing short of expropriation. There is even talk of a Bitcoin death blow because that is exactly what the SPD is planning, because it would make Bitcoin so unattractive that it would have almost no relevance for Germany. Let's take a look at the press release and why there is now more and more resistance against the SPD's insidious attempt to stop Bitcoin here. Or they wouldn't stop Bitcoin, but they would definitely push through the green ideology at the expense of Bitcoin holders and continue to build socialist redistribution systems here. This absolutely needs to be stopped. I also received a lot of feedback yesterday on my video where many people said, okay, hey, they're either emigrating or they want to do something about it. I saw that there's now an initiative here where you can write an email to the member of the Bundestag from your own electoral district. Just write an email and simply say, hey folks, it can't go on like this. We are Bitcoin here, we don't want to be taken advantage of, or something like that. That means I'll also link it for you below, where you can actually use a pre-made form. You simply send it to the member of the Bundestag, and you might make some modifications to it. And the recommendation was actually to send it towards the CDU, because the CDU will be the decisive party here, together with the SPD. Either push the bill through or not. The bill, but here in the coalition negotiations, where it comes down to the crucial details. A very detailed guide. As I said, I'll link it for you below. The blog trainer wrote a very, very good article about it. At first, I saw the whole thing very, very negatively, what's going on with the SPD here. But you can actually see it positively because we see that there is now resistance. There is now truly a political counter-movement. And this could even strengthen Bitcoin because the population is taking to the streets. And other parties are also taking to the streets. Of course, the AfD is now the first party to officially speak out against it. But this is definitely a very, very relevant topic here. There is now the official statement on the AfD homepage about this. Clearly states here, prevent the SPD's death blow to Bitcoin. This comes from here, from Dirk Brandes. I also heard an interview with him once, with the call. From Action im Kopf, it must have been about half a year ago. He also talked about Bitcoin, the dangers of the digital euro, and how he is very, very critical of how the whole thing works with central banks. You could also tell that he understands how fiat money works, that it's a corrupt system where only a very, very few people benefit, and so on. I found that very, very refreshing back then. Meanwhile, there are more and more pro-Bitcoin voices. I had an interview with Peter Boehringer, and we'll also watch a small excerpt from it later, from him because he also comments on the whole taxation of Bitcoin, or rather the one-year holding period. We know that Alice Weidel herself holds Bitcoin. We know that Maximilian Krach is also open to Bitcoin. That means in the AfD, as I see it now, there is probably quite a large approval for Bitcoin. Probably not everyone is pro-Bitcoin, but people are at least neutral, if not tending to be positive. So let's take a look at this now here. Berlin, March 27th. It says here, the SPD wants to abolish the one-year period for tax gains from trading Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. This emerges from documents from the coalition negotiations between the CDU, CSU, and SPD. For Germany as a crypto location, this would be a severe blow. Investors and their savings would be massively, additionally burdened. And here, one must say that this is actually being properly classified now because this is often not mentioned when the SPD says, yes, then we'll just tax the Bitcoin people, then we'll introduce a wealth tax, then we'll introduce a property tax. It's always said, okay, hey, then we'll implement the tax, but it's not mentioned. That this is a massive slap in the face for savers. I already mentioned this in the last video. On one hand, the fiat money system doesn't work, meaning you can't save in a bank account, the savings book doesn't work. And now they're also closing off the alternatives. Now they want to tax gold, tax Bitcoin, tax stocks, tax real estate. The fresh real estate stock is also supposed to fall, and so on. And that's a massive outrage. That's fraud against the voters. But the statement goes on here. Why this is exactly fraud? Against the voters. It continues here, the AfD member of the Bundestag, Dirk Brandes, states, and this is a quote from him, the regulations that have been in place so far. Allow crypto investors to keep their profits tax-free if they hold their cryptocurrencies for over a year. The SPD's plans to overturn the regulation and tax profits in the future, like conventional capital income, at up to 30% represent a massive intrusion into the financial freedom of citizens. And that's exactly what I always tell you. We should remember that the money which is already taxed is not like it just fell from the sky, or something like that. The money is hard-earned money, it's taxed money. The state has already taken its share quite heavily. Additionally, there's also taxation through inflation. And if this is further restricted with taxes, as mentioned here, It would be a massive intrusion into the financial freedom of citizens. There are even plans now for things like requiring not only employees, but also self-employed individuals to officially pay into the pension fund, meaning the social system. That means at the moment, there is still a way out, that you can at least say, okay, I'll just become self-employed, and then I can somehow bypass the Ponzi scheme of the pension system. Because it's also quite clear that this thing has to explode sooner or later. It's already not sustainable now. The federal budget already has to contribute so many millions or billions, whatever it is, to keep this thing going, because there are simply far too few contributors and too many people taking from the pot when the demographics in our country are simply broken. And accordingly, it can't work, and therefore one must make private provisions. I always say this too, hey people, make sure you do something. Either get yourself some gold, get Bitcoin. For all I care, get stocks or real estate or something like that, but do something with your money. Just letting it sit in the account or relying on the state is not an option. This is a very, very, let's say, dubious scenario we find ourselves in. That means we have to trust the state. We have to basically pay into the compulsory systems, but we can't rely on it because we can already say with certainty that we are being massively shortchanged here. We are being massively taken advantage of by the state because what we pay in, we will never get back adjusted for purchasing power. Never get back again. And that's a massive outrage. And it's important now that people, let's say, come together and I wouldn't say protest, but at least become aware of it, make some kind of counterstatement like a press release, make some videos, write an email to the members of parliament. For all I care, go to them personally, ring their bell or talk to them and say, hey folks, do you even know what's going on here right now? I mean, I'm not trying to encourage anyone to harass people or anything, but this is definitely an urgent matter happening here. It is said here that without regard for the consequences, the Social Democrats seem to have discovered a new source of revenue to fund their leftist ideological, environmental fantasies. Deceptively, these plans were not explicitly outlined in the SPD's election program. The international race for attractive crypto tax regulations plays a central role in the choice of location for investments by crypto companies. So this is also clearly acknowledged here. This is also what I already mentioned in the video yesterday. So they are actually saying relatively similar things, that Germany as a location is simply becoming increasingly unattractive. I mean, where are the big companies going? I mean, in the USA, some big Bitcoin crypto companies are going there because they know they have regulatory certainty. I mean, in the future, they certainly won't go to Germany and definitely not to the EU, but to other countries. Or, of course, they might go to El Salvador or wherever I prefer. Somewhere else where it's friendly for Bitcoin, or to Switzerland, as far as I'm concerned. And the crazy thing is that there's talk about voter fraud here because I mean, nothing is said like, hey, I'm voting for the SPD and then there's no more tax exemption on Bitcoin or something like that. Nothing is ever said about that. And now it's the reality we're confronted with here. But I mean, on the other hand, if you vote for socialists, I mean, what can you expect when you vote for socialists? I mean, because it's obvious that sooner or later socialists always become overbearing because they can't get anything done themselves. So they basically have to use other people's money. That's always the idea of socialism. You're too dumb and not competent enough to get the system in shape yourself. So you always have to pester more citizens because you need other people's money when you can't get anything done yourself. Then it continues here. Germany could risk its attractiveness as a crypto financial hub with this measure. And that's already the case now. It's not just when the regulation comes through, but it's already very unattractive now. Here, especially when you always have the uncertainty, okay, do we have a leftist government here and so on? They can at any time here push through some weird things or throw some new strange ideas into the mix. In the competition of currencies, the SPD is trying to displace Bitcoin as a welcome candidate for state-free money. Unlike the CDU and SPD, the AfD faction will stick to what was promised before the election. The tax exemption on profits from trading cryptocurrencies after the one-year holding period must be maintained. Furthermore, we will defend the right to mine Bitcoin and ensure that every German has the right to manage their digital assets themselves, free from government surveillance and control, to prevent transactions from being conducted. So I would say that this is a much better statement than saying, hey, we want even more money from you. So it's better to have a somewhat neutral to slightly positive regulation for Bitcoin here. You don't have to, like Donald Trump, have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but at least not regulate it negatively. We will now look at a segment where Peter Boehringer has summarized very well what the AfD's idea is and why he views it very, very critically, with the abolition of the tax exemption here. This is a clip that was recorded a few months ago when I did the interview with him, but he already summarized it very, very well back then.
Demands complete tax exemption. We haven't gone that far yet. Anyone who reads our press release carefully will see that the current situation, which is actually quite paradisiacal for the Bitcoin community, involves no sales tax. Capital gains tax after 1 year, we want to maintain that. By the way, this is the same privilege, and it really must be said, it is a privilege, as with gold. When I issued this press release, I received an email from Oliver Janich, who might be known here as well, and who is also a very libertarian person, and a big Bitcoin fan. Yes, why didn't you demand total tax exemption? Of course, you can demand that from us now, but I'm just saying, shouldn't the community be relatively satisfied with the current situation? Would gains be tax-free after 1 year? That hardly exists in any country. So, there aren't many places where tax exemption is that great. I received relatively few responses in that direction, suggesting we need to go further. Oliver Janich was really an exception there. I would also be interested in how your community thinks about it. Of course, one can always wish for more, but every stock, every ETF, every fund nowadays is basically taxed, but even after 10, 20 years, the value increase is still taxed. So it's a great privilege to be able to achieve this tax exemption at all, even if only after 1 year. I'll leave it at that for now, but that's the introduction.
I think most people are really aware that we have a really big privilege here in Germany. And the danger or fear that many people have is more that the 1 year tax exemption might be abolished. I believe there was even a proposal from the Green Party to abolish the 1 year holding period. And many people have also written, hey, what about the AfD? Will the 1 year holding period continue? But it's already positive to see that you are not opposing it, but rather saying, okay, hey, we want to maintain the 1 year holding period.
What I can't promise is stories that go beyond that. Also, it's not our job, and I specifically wrote this in the press release, to subsidize Bitcoin in any way. We support it ideologically. We support it with this regulation and extensive tax exemption. It's not our job to push the price. Bitcoin has to achieve that out of conviction. And I would say that most in your community would agree with that. Yes, it is so great and so convincing that it will be very attractive. And that's probably also the price increase.
The funny thing is that exactly what we discussed back then is now the reality. Back then, we were still talking about the fears. The potential tax refreshes them here, being abolished. And now we actually have it here on the table, and now it's being publicly discussed. So very, very crazy what's going on here. But folks, hey, it's good that the resistance is now rising. Share the video, that's important too, right? Write to your members of parliament. Some might even emigrate, that's also a way. This way, you can also deprive the socialists of money. But everyone has to find their own path here. You can also just say, I'll ignore the whole thing, but then you might wake up to socialism one day. You can also invest in Bitcoin, for example, save in Bitcoin and not in euros. This way, you can also deprive the system of money. If you want to buy Bitcoin here, I'll put a link below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. Here, with the code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you until then. Peace out.